Cool. And yay. All right. Well, thank you for joining at the Indy Xamarin Meetup. My name's Auri Rahimzadeh. I'm the owner of Auri's Ideas. I've been doing Xamarin development since the beginning. So back when you had to pay for it. So back when gosh, what was it? I don't even remember exactly how much it was. But I think it was around, I think it was under $2,000. I'm fairly certain it was under $2,000. And then it became, it got acquired by Microsoft. Or actually, I think before it got acquired by Microsoft, it was $50 per user per month. And then it got acquired by Microsoft, and shortly thereafter was free. And I even have the Xamarin Certified Mobile Developer. It was whatever one took forever to get. Was the it was the highest one you could get. And I got that certification too. And then they did away with the Xamarin University and merged all of that stuff into MS Learn, Microsoft Learn, which is great because there's so much wonderful content out there. But yeah, so it's quite the adventure. So today we're going to talk about .NET MAUI and Xamarin, the future of that. But the overarching theme of my presentation is really what I feel we tried doing as Xamarin developers, and just because I'm guessing that many of us are not just Xamarin developers, we're Microsoft developers. So how do we as Microsoft developers use Microsoft technology to target every platform? And I promise I'm not going to read from the slides. So I wanted to give some history about how we got to where we are today, because .NET MAUI isn't a thing that, it's like, oh, hey, what a great idea, let's just do MAUI. It's really another step in the journey to solving this question, which is, how do you use Microsoft to target everything from every device, every platform, mobile, PC, etc. So, plus I also want to put Liam Neeson up there. I have a very particular set of skills. I can ship an app in a hackathon in 24 hours. So let's talk a little bit about Windows UIs and how this has changed. So as Microsoft developers, we're used to fragmentation. At least I feel we are. And we've gone through it all. And it hasn't always seemed like we're getting better. It seems like we always have something new. And consolidation just, a decade ago, even 5 years ago. Oh, no, a decade ago, I would have trouble believing that's where we were going. But let's take a look at Windows UIs as an example, because way in the beginning of Windows, it did everything code-based. It was written in C, or assembly, a mix of both. And then things got really easy when we had Visual Basic and WinForms. But that was really for desktop development. So if you wanted to do other things like web, XAML and Silverlight came into play, but that didn't build necessarily desktop apps. But oh yeah, you could do UWP. Yeah, but you still could do WinForms, and UWP came with its own UX language, design language called, well, originally it was Metro, and then they got sued, so then Modern UI. But there really was no formal switch, right? Microsoft pushed you to, hey, you should do UWP, but you also lose a bunch of capability if you go this route. So people still did WinForms, and then you even had incompatibility with Silverlight. You can kind of see this fragmentation coming just by going back and forth in this bullet list. And then what about mobile? So we got desktop covered, and we sort of have web covered, even with different technologies. We got Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android, just mobile development with C#, or mobile development with .NET. At the time, it was really mostly C#. And those had their own thing. So you could reuse the code, which was good. So, this whole time we're able to reuse code as long as it wasn't UI. So Xamarin iOS and Android, to do a UI, you had to do a storyboard in iOS or Zibs and Nibs, and then AXML with Android, and then the blessing of Xamarin.Forms came by, which is like, hey, you know what? On the mobile side, we're going to solve a lot of this. We're going to make it so that not only can you have the code reuse for all your objects, your services, etc., you can also reuse your UI, and we'll map it to the appropriate native stuff. So that was one of the first rays of light of seeing some consolidation on the Microsoft end, even though it wasn't, it wasn't Microsoft at the time. And then we got, well, hey, XAML's continuing to be a thing, so we're going to push that more, with UWP and Windows Store applications, etc. WinForms wasn't a second-class citizen, but it was also just not getting the updates it wanted. So in order to keep people along the same path, Microsoft introduced XAML Standard. What was that, 2 years ago? So now we're seeing a little bit of consolidation, but it wasn't really pushed heavily. It's like, yeah, it's XAML Standard. It's a great idea, but we're not going to push it so hard. But gosh, from the UI perspective, it's been really hard to figure out what's the right approach when you build a Windows app or an app using Microsoft's the Microsoft stack. What UI framework do you use? Do you use WinForms? Do you use XAML? Do you use something native? Do you use web? Do you use HTML? Like Blazor? Do you just write it in code? And how can I ensure that whatever I write is going to be supported years from now? That's really hard. And with all the fragmentation, we don't know what to do. So that's where the Windows UI issue is, and that's our history. Now, the same thing has sort of happened. The same thing that happened with Windows UIs also has kind of happened with just the languages and the stacks themselves. Because in the beginning, we had C and assembly, and then we got Visual Basic, so we got another language, and we won't get into all the other flavors of, what was it, Visual J++ and all that other stuff. I won't dive into that. But, well, how did we build? We had VBA, right? And then how do we share this code with each other? Well, we had COM and we had DLL hell, and then, well, that really sucked. So now we got .NET. Yay, .NET and all of its cool capabilities and the eventual ability to have side-by-side. Well, but how do you make the COM stuff work with .NET? Well, we got this .NET interop. Okay. Well, I am a Xamarin developer. Xamarin came onto the scene. Well, how are we going to make that work? Well, that's not exactly .NET. That's Mono. Oh, well, how's that going to be compatible? Well, we'll work on that. But if you want things to be compatible, like with UWP and Windows, specifically Windows versions like Windows 7 versus Windows 8, etc., you can use these portable class libraries. That'll be our new way of making things compatible. Yeah, because they're portable class libraries. So now we've got Mono and Xamarin and PCL, and that didn't work out very well. If you dealt with PCL, I don't know why this keeps on switching the slide. If you ever used PCL, you've probably noticed the weird compatibility issues that you have with PCL and trying to remember what all the profiles are. We've gotten some UI hints to try making PCL work, but the sooner you could get away from PCL, the better. Especially if you're a Xamarin developer, I imagine you remember those nightmares. And then we figured out, well, okay, so we've got .NET and PCL, right? Because there's the same issue, Mono and Xamarin and PCL, .NET and PCL, and all this after all this time, Microsoft finally released .NET Core and .NET Standard to start solving some of this stuff. So we had not only .NET and PCL and just .NET in general and .NET Framework, we also had .NET Core and .NET Standard working together. And then we had to figure out how to make the .NET framework work with .NET Standard. How do you make that work? And then finally, Xamarin switched to .NET Standard, but you still had PCL. And then we finally got to the point where after a few years, because I think Xamarin's been using .NET Standard libraries by default for a couple years now, that you could have Windows and Xamarin and .NET Standard and really just have one project that just worked, especially with NuGet. But look at all this mess that we had to deal with just to finally get to this. And the same thing goes for UI. So if we looked at UI, we had to go through all this stuff to basically get to this. But for the longest time, we would mix all these things together until it finally got replaced. And the same thing happened with Microsoft's just development in general. So this is all part of Microsoft's journey to one .NET. Microsoft has heard our fragmentation cries and said, we hear you. And you can really see their commitment to this in their open source approach now. If you have a problem with how Xamarin's doing things, go fix it and issue a pull request. And the team is very good about reviewing pull requests, accepting them into the code base. Microsoft technology these days is very community driven. Obviously, like, you know, the products they sell, like Office and so forth, are not open sourced, but parts of them are. And a lot of the development stacks that we use, especially .NET in general now, is all open source. It's amazing. So the goal is to make it so that you can use .NET on any device, be it a watch, a phone, a tablet, Linux, Mac, Windows, the server, the cloud. You could do it all with .NET. And over the past few years, and by few years, I mean like the last 5, especially in the last 3, as .NET Standard and .NET Core have really come to maturity. Now that we're at .NET 3, you can see the movement from the very Windows-centric fragmentation, attracting foundation that all of our development really has stemmed from, into a single core solution that's common. And that's where .NET Standard and Core and .NET Core have really come in and changed our lives for the better. Now, we're still stuck right now with .NET Framework and .NET and just .NET Core, and that's going away. So if you haven't heard, the next version of .NET will be called .NET 5, and .NET 5 is .NET Core, and the framework goes away. So we're no longer going to have. We're no longer going to call .NET Core .NET Core. It's just going to be .NET, and that gets released this winter. It's you'll see at .NET Conf. I think it's in November. I'm not entirely sure. .NET 5 is supposed to be released, as I understand it. And the cool thing about .NET 5 is it will consolidate all of our development for desktop, for web, and server development to use .NET Core. Xamarin is still part of that, but the Maui stuff that we're going to get to, the mobile consolidation, you'll notice that I've got desktop, web, and server are in .NET 5. .NET 6 will have the mobile consolidation, and that's where Maui comes in. We'll get into that and give you details. Even better, finally, we have well-known namespaces so that when you write something in .NET, you're writing it in .NET, not .NET and PCL, .NET and it's the framework, .NET and it's .NET Core, or a .NET with these restrictions. It's .NET. And every piece that you want to bring in, as long as your device supports it, your platform supports it, you will get that capability. Look at NuGet, right? You know, all the pieces that you bring in. If you look at Blazor, it's very cool. At the Indy.NET consortium, which I also help run, we just had a Blazor presentation. You can actually see it bring down the .NET assemblies so that it can run C# locally in a SPA, a single page application. It's very cool. Just to see that come down and see C# running effectively in a browser, it blew my mind. Also, effectively what I was saying is it's a consolidation. It's the great consolidation of functionality into these well-known namespaces. And keep in mind, all open source. If you don't like it, change it. Now, for the longest time, there's been this write once, run anywhere dream. And it's, you know, we sort of had it with C, but, you know, if anybody remembers Java's promise, you know, but then you saw Java, right? You know, if you saw a Java app, you knew you were using a Java app. I mean, if you were on the Mac or Windows or Linux, you know, it was not the great uniter. It was a slow, relatively terrible experience, and you had to write everything in Java. I would always joke with my friends, especially, you know, once I got really into C#, but being a .NET developer for so long, you know, Java's great, except for Java. So, but this goal, you know, write an app once or write software or code once and run it on any platform is not a bad thing. And from a business perspective, you know, if you forget the technology side, from a business perspective, it's huge because you can share your code and lower your cost. You know, one thing I'll get into in a bit is kind of how we, as .NET developers, we always seem to have a crutch. We always seem to have like a helper language that we got to use. Once we get out of the Windows world, like WinForms, yeah, we got to do something special, you know, to do the platform specific stuff. Even web, we rely on JavaScript heavily to do things. But getting back to write once, run anywhere, you know, C had it, Java, I talked about that. Web, yeah, you know, if you build something for the web, yeah, it just works everywhere. And the cool thing about a website is that, you know, people don't expect a certain language to it. By language, I mean like a design language and a UX. There's certain common things, you know, like menus and so forth. But, you know, the sky's the limit on your creativity for the most part with a language or with a website when it comes to the web. But the web is, you know, you're still using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then in the back end, you've got something else. If you're a .NET developer, you've got that whole, you know, ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core. Maybe you had ASP.NET MVC, or you just had something else, and you know, or even ASP. You know, so it wasn't the great uniter. It was very cool. You know, the client ran everywhere. It was relatively compatible once Flash went away and CSS and JavaScript got, you know, the capabilities they needed. But it definitely wasn't a write once, run anywhere. It might be a design once, run almost anywhere, except for mobile. Xamarin, we all know and love. C# was our language of choice, and we could basically reuse everything we wanted. But for the longest time, that didn't include the UI. So you could share, you know, 90% of your code, 95% of your code, but none of your UI. And then that got solved with Xamarin.Forms. great solution. I mean, I don't know how many people don't use Xamarin.Forms today as Xamarin developers. But it also gave you like this Frankenproj, where you had your Xamarin.Forms class library, unless you had the shared project, that was a whole other thing. But then you had your Xamarin iOS, and your Xamarin Android projects. And you had to maintain those, and every time you installed NuGet packages, you had to go into app delegate in iOS and do things one way, and then on Android you had to go into your onCreate and do things another way. And then there were all these issues per platform, and then you still had to drop into the native languages in those separate projects to do any of the custom stuff that you want to do. Like if Xamarin.Forms and a NuGet package didn't support it, you had custom renderers and effects, etc. And that was rough. Not to mention your images and your fonts, the way they're treated, completely different per platform. Your images in iOS, you have your normal image, your 2x, your 3x. On Android, you've got your LDPI, MDPI, HDPI, XDPI, XXDPI, XXXDPI, and then you also just have a drawing folder. What? Or drawable. So not perfect, but really close. If it was the difference between building an Android app and an iOS app, one in Java, one in Swift, and then also building the UWP app, at least you could share your code if you went the Xamarin route, and the UI, you could generally share it. I think these days especially, Xamarin.Forms does almost everything you need, and it goes vice versa now. As of a couple years ago, you can actually still do just a native application, bring Xamarin.Forms in, build the simple pages with XAML, and then bring them in as an Android view or as a UI controller based on Android or iOS. So it's very cool. You can go both ways there. But what does Xamarin not solve? It doesn't solve the Windows app per se. You're still limited in what you're building. You can do your UWP, but I haven't seen that being the norm. And you can do a Mac app. So it really is, though, a very good starting point, and we'll get into where Maui comes in here, to consolidating the UI along with the code for multi-device development. Not perfect, but really close. And then React Native is kind of like the same thing, but for JavaScript folks. One project, multiple apps. You have a lot less flexibility when it comes to customization. So unlike Xamarin, where if there's something missing, you can just go access the Android libraries or the iOS libraries like UIKit or what have you, and build whatever you want, and it's still all in C#. So yeah, the frameworks aren't the same, but at least you get to write everything in C#. So no language learning curve there. React Native, if you wanted to build that app, you could build your React app, so you've got your web covered, which covers a lot of devices. JavaScript being like the great uniter of a lot of platforms, and then it can also build the mobile app. But if React Native can't translate, it doesn't have a capability you need, you have to, for iOS, write that capability with Swift or Objective-C. And in Android, you have to write it with Java or was it Kotlin? And then you can use the Android native libraries? What is that? I don't remember what that's called exactly. But you got to write it in the native language or the languages that are supported to build those new native components. So Maui, which we'll get into, draws a lot on the reality of this, that you can write everything in C# and for any device, but let's get rid of some of the limitations of this Franken project, which like I said, we'll get into. So this is leading us to, we're all generally C# developers. I mean, I'm guessing we might, some of us know F# or Visual Basic, or even, God forbid, VBA. But one problem that we have is we're probably really good C# developers, and then we have some level of proficiency in all the other helper languages that we need to do to reach all the other devices. Like, we can turn out an API like a rock star, and we could build a desktop app like nobody's business. It might not look great because we're not all UX and UI guys, but it'll work. But that doesn't translate well to the web. And that doesn't translate necessarily well to every other device that's out there. So, but why not? I mean, just like JavaScript runs on every device, why doesn't C#? Why can't we run C# just like we do anything else? Like JavaScript or Python. So, because code reuse and skill reuse is paramount. It saves time and money, and it saves us, it just makes us more efficient. So Microsoft is working diligently towards this, and there's a video that's about this. I'm not going to play it. I'll give you the links to it, but they're showing that you can actually start writing you can use C#, basically headless, meaning you can use it like a scripting language. So you could just have a file that's C# and just say system.console.writeline hello world, and you could run that. No main, no imports, nothing. It would just run. And you're starting to see that hey, why not use C# everywhere, popping up in a lot of places. One example, Blazor. You don't use JavaScript in Blazor. You can, and it integrates very well with it, but you could build your entire site and all the interaction with C# and Razor files, and it just runs. No JavaScript necessary. No JavaScript required. We need that bumper sticker. JavaScript isn't bad. It depends who you ask. But my gosh, why do I need to use two languages when one will do? Especially when my skill set is in one particular language. Especially when I'd like to use LINQ in order to sort things on the client side. I shouldn't have to write all that stuff in JavaScript or bring in a really heavy library, be it Vue or React or Angular or any number of the bazillion JavaScript frameworks, the YAGIFs, the yet another JavaScript framework. I should be able to take my C# skills and use it anywhere on any device and just get started. If I want to build a website, it'll be C#. If I want to build a mobile app, it's C#. If I want to build a desktop app, C#. And by the way, if I want to add any additional devices or presentation tiers for the most part, you know what? All my objects are the same, my libraries are the same, my NuGet package is effectively the same. I should be able to just add the new device, bring in the projects that already have my shared code, and just go. I should be ready to go in a day and not have to convert with a helper language. So Microsoft is bringing us that in .NET 5 and also .NET 6. It's not stopping at .NET 5. FYI, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. I can't see that, so Lachlan, if you see anything, I'd really appreciate it if you just let me know, because I just have my one screen. I'm not on my multi-screen setup right now. Yeah, and thank you.
I'll pass them on.
Thank you very much. So .NET, to be clear, is what we're getting in November, December timeframe, at .NET Conf when .NET 5 comes out. So .NET is going to be soon. The framework formerly known as .NET Core, they won't give it a weird symbol. That's going to be the path forward. But the cool thing is you've been preparing for this for a number of years now. You shouldn't have to learn that much more, if anything, because Visual Studio takes care of a lot of stuff for you. And if you don't want the heaviness of Visual Studio, you still have the CLI, .NET, .NET whatever, .NET Build, .NET Create, etc. And you can even build, with Maui, you can even build a Xamarin app in Visual Studio Code, in VS Code. It's crazy. So, what does all of this bring us to? We've had the UI and the Windows issues, or the Windows development issues, and all that fragmentation, and that's been brought in to .NET Framework, and then finally .NET Core, and Xamarin.Forms takes care, or Xamarin, uses that. We've got C# coming to almost a script-like capability. We've got Blazor, and we have all this code reuse. So much code reuse. What comes next from this? How does it affect us as Xamarin developers? Well, that's where .NET Maui comes in. Now, .NET Maui was introduced at this year's build, and it means multi-application UI, .NET multi-application UI. It is very canary right now. Canary is the Microsoft term for alpha. And then it goes beta, then it goes release candidates, and then finally GA, general availability. But Maui is building upon what you already know and love about Xamarin and Xamarin.Forms, and making it better and continuing the consolidation. So if you already know Xamarin.Forms, you already have a head start on Maui, because all the traditional approaches still work, such as MVVM and React UI. It's cross-platform, native UI, just like Xamarin, but they're they're rewriting all the renderers, as I understand it. So it's going to be even faster, even better. But maybe the best part about all of this is the Frankenproj goes away. We'll no longer have a Xamarin iOS project, a Xamarin Android project, Xamarin UWP project, and then all of our other stuff, plus a Xamarin.Forms project, or just a shared Xamarin project. That goes away. Now, how great that's going to work, like I said, it's very canary. Really, outside of Microsoft, it's not available. But from what I've seen, it's phenomenal. I'm going to show you some of what those look like, and I'm going to refer you to a video so that you don't have to sit and watch a video with me waiting for you to watch a video. But I'll tell you the time that's at. It's at 1 hour and 15 minutes into the video that I'll share at the end. Now, Maui will not be coming this November in any sort of final form. It's insanely canary, like I said. It's coming in .NET 6, but a preview is slated for this winter, and I have a whole when slide that's about this. Now, if we go back, remember, Xamarin.Forms got us really close to being on all devices and sharing the UI and the code. So Microsoft's running with that. It's going to take Xamarin.Forms, and that's going to become or be consolidated into system.ui. So the way we'll build and manage UI across all .NET applications will be the same, which is awesome if you're targeting multiple platforms, because you want it to be like, well, does Xamarin support it? Well, then I can't build the presentation tier for that. I got to do that a different way. Maui is going to solve that. Xamarin Essentials, which you know and love, right now is going to evolve into system.devices. I'm curious if it's going to stay that way. Naturally, I don't think that makes sense to me yet. But then again, I haven't seen enough to say, so I'm going to hold my judgment. That's hard, I think, sometimes for a developer to do.
We've got a question
now,
here in the chat. Is
what's
C#
up?
the only language that Maui will support?
I don't know yet. That's a good question, and I have a chart that might have some of that on it. I think right now it's C#, but I don't see why, if it's going to be part of .NET 5 and .NET 6, that you wouldn't be able to use any .NET language. So as long as you could use .NET Core, .NET Standard, I think it would stand to reason that you'd be able to use any .NET language. But I don't know. But if you send me that, if you would send me that, if you send me that question, I'll ask the team and see if they know. The other thing that you could do is also just go to the GitHub for this and ask that question. But my guess is that it should be any language, because you'll start a new application and I don't see why it wouldn't support it.
I've just found the GitHub issue for it on the .NET Maui repo. F#
good.
support from day one has 287 upvotes. Plus 94
Did you say F#?
F# support from day one. So.
Oh yeah. And Xamarin already supports F#, so I don't see why you wouldn't be able to do that. Even if it, I don't understand how it would be language specific at this time. Because one thing that's going away, as I understand it, is mono. So it's all gonna be .NET for Android and .NET for iOS. So I believe, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'm fairly certain the whole mono thing goes away, and it'll be Microsoft's .NET implementation. But that's my guess. I don't see why they would consolidate it and then not do what you're asking. Now, whether the template will be available, just to shift a little bit, will there be, let's say, an F# template available on day one? I don't know. Maybe not. Just given the time they have. But whether you could build an app with F# or VB or whatever, I don't know why you wouldn't be able to do that as long as it's supported through .NET Core. So that's my guess. We'll know more in 2021. But watch the GitHub, which I'll give you all those links, and you can watch this happen. And so I already said it's no longer going to be Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android. It's going to now be called .NET for Android and .NET for iOS. And of course, this will still be open source. So if you want to start seeing what all this stuff looks like, you can go online today and see what they're working on. There's a Maui GitHub repo and there's a .NET 6 GitHub repo. So you can go ask. If you want to have a say in how .NET evolves, you have direct access to not only the code, but the team via the open issue management system. So I encourage you to get involved. So what do you get with .NET Maui? Well, you're not going to lose anything you already know how to do. So the traditional XAML approach and MVVM approach with the view model, that's still supported. It's not going anywhere. But there's mobile Blazor bindings. There's reactive UI. And if you want code-based UI generation, which also reactive UI does, you can use MVU, model view update. which is really cool. I'll share some code examples of this. I don't know if it's my cup of tea yet until I play with it. But then again, I was a VB guy that ended up converting to C#. I had my team convince me, why are we building things in Visual Basic? But, I'd been doing it for so long. I was like an old salty dog, and, when I was like 30, right? But still. So there's going to be a lot of great ways to build your UI. And we have, excuse me, we have so much exciting stuff, especially around Blazor. Blazor's, it's hot. It's amazing. If you haven't seen Blazor, you got to check it out. And the Blazor mobile bindings are basically build your app UI with HTML, basically with Razor files. That is pretty freaking cool. And that's only going to get better over time. I think it's beta right now, maybe alpha, canary. But it just is very promising. So, model view update, if you haven't seen it, this is pretty cool. So I want to build my, let's say my main page in my Xamarin app using model view update in Maui. Look how I build it. Okay. Body is a new stack layout with a label and a button. And here's how we handle the events on it. You clicked count times and nice and fluent. Count that value. Look how easy that was to wire up. Yay, model view update. It's pretty slick. I'm looking forward to more examples of this, and I'm very curious if they come up with a template for each one of these. So like the one with Blazor mobile bindings, one with model view update, and then one with the traditional MVVM approach. Then we have mobile Blazor bindings. I was telling you about this. How sweet is this? Look at that. There's your stack layout. Doesn't that look like HTML? It's basically like HTML5. And then look, it's Blazor. You've got the code. So if you know Blazor, you just learned also Xamarin development or Maui development. Pretty slick. And on top of this, they listen to a lot of the pain points of Xamarin developers. And really not just Xamarin, but multi-platform developers. Because when we're Xamarin developers, we're not just Xamarin devs. We're iOS devs. We're Android devs. We're UWP devs. We might be Tizen devs. We may target a watch, a tablet, a phone, a desktop PC. There's a lot we have to think about. And the way that we had to implement that with the Android stuff and the Windows stuff and the iOS stuff and all the sizes and the fonts and making sure everything is correct, that the P list is right, the manifest is right, etc. And there's every nuance imaginable to every platform. They've said this is how it's going to work. Fonts will be in one nice folder. Images will be in one nice folder. Platforms, there's going to anything that you want to do that's platform specific will be in a platforms folder. Very neat stuff. I'll show you that. Right here, that 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, that's the spot in the video. So 115 is where Maui is introduced, and then if you want to see what this stuff looks like, you just go to that 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. You don't have to write this down. I'll put it in the notes. Now, while we're waiting for Maui, Microsoft isn't going to stop improving Xamarin.Forms or Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android. They're going to keep on working on it. So Xamarin.Forms is going to keep on being improved, and all that stuff's going to end up in Maui and thus system.ui. So you have you don't need to stop developing and go learn Maui. You can continue developing and move to Maui when you're ready. Now, ultimately, Maui, I feel, is going to be the way forward. So you're going to have to move, just like when you had to move from PCL to .NET Standard with Xamarin, and that didn't hurt much. You're going to probably have to do the same thing with Maui. Is it going to be 6 months after Maui's released? I don't think so, but I would think in the first 1 to 2 years, you're going to want to be switching over to Maui. Assuming that it works as well as advertised, considering it doesn't really, it's nowhere near existing in a complete form right now. I mean, it's more than a year away in any sort of final form, but maybe less than 6 months away in a preview, and we all know that previews can be rough and change. When it's ready, I think that will start the clock ticking that you're going to want to use it. Now, years ago, I learned that with any new technology, you want to wait 9 months, at least 90 days, but generally 9 months before you switch to something brand new, because that gets all the bugs out. Because even with an open preview, the chances of getting all the detail or all the bugs out is low. Or it's not low, but lower than when everyone is using it because it's generally available. I think that's when the bugs really come out. Like, crap, we started using this in production, and look at those issues. So don't feel that you got to switch immediately, because there's nothing to switch to right now. But definitely keep your ear to the ground. But this, like I said, this solves that big, huge issue of resources, missing images, missing fonts, all the problems that you had with that Franken-Proj approach. For those of you that use mFractor, they've announced that they will support it. And by default, you'll be able to debug with Windows. And you can even plug in an iPhone or Android device on Windows and start debugging to it. So pretty cool stuff. They've got that in that video as well. This, right around this time. But really, if you just start watching from like 1:15 forward, then you'll be able to see the Maui demo. So here's what it looks like. Take a look at this. You've got your platforms folder, a resources folder, which is where all of your images go. Look at this, where your fonts and your images. Isn't that amazing? Here's how your dependencies get handled. So you put your device-specific code in these folders. I'll leave this up so you can look at it for a little bit. It's one project. Look at that. One project. Awesome. You can run it on the iPhone or Windows or what have you. Right from, just like before. It's really not that different right there. But look how much easier this, at least from a management perspective, a project management perspective, not a project management, but a project management and solution management perspective, this is so much easier, at least the way I see it. I love that fonts are just right there. It makes me so happy every time I see it. So, how different are these guys? Like, how different are Xamarin.Forms and .NET Maui? Well, there's really not a lot of issues there. So Xamarin.Forms will require Android 19 and iOS 9 to 15. That's what will be supported. But then Maui will support API 21 and 10 and higher. So this might be an issue for some of you Android developers, especially if you use like kiosk and older devices. That might be a problem. But keep in mind, Xamarin.Forms is not going away. It's not gone. You know, it's not like the moment .NET Maui comes out, you're no longer supported. Microsoft is going to be providing more stuff. So the Linux port, that's going to still come from the community, but Mac OS will come from Microsoft. No longer a community effort. Although, because it's open source, it's a community effort. Huh. The Tizen support still coming from Samsung. I haven't heard of that going away. I'm not sure. Being a developer in North America, I don't know what the impact of Samsung possibly pulling out would be. I know outside of the United States, Tizen is a thing, you know, especially like South America. So, you know, this really is important outside of the United States. But what it means, I don't know yet. The Windows support is going to be fully supported by Microsoft. So basically, if you want to build an app, just use .NET Maui to target all versions of Windows plus all other devices. On the model side that's built in, you know, right now we only have MVVM and reactive UI, which I haven't played around with much, but it seems pretty cool. You're going to get the model view update and the Blazor mobile bindings. You get all the benefits of single project, multi-targeting, multi-window. And on the .NET side, it's going to be .NET 6. So you have this craziness with, you know, Mono, .NET Framework, Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, all that nutty stuff. There's your consolidation right there. It's just going to be .NET. No more, what Mono version do I have installed on my Mac? We've already talked about the project system. You get the .NET CLI. You'll be able to build the traditional ways. So Visual Studio, that's definitely supported. But then VS Code, if you're so willing, you can build your entire Xamarin app, or .NET Maui app, in VS Code. And it was pretty cool to see it, like just see it running. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to do that, just because there's certain things I don't get with VS Code, but it sounds really cool, and who knows what additional extensions will come out for VS Code. So when is this coming? The preview is coming this winter. It's going to be likely part of the .NET 6 preview because they've been pretty adamant that it's going to be part of .NET 6, not .NET 5. Possibly at the .NET Conf this winter when .NET 5 is officially released. But they've been pretty open that this is a lot of work. And they hope to have it by this winter, but they're not sure. And then the GA on it is expected winter 2021. So we have a lot of time. I mean, there's like 18 months before you're going to see GA at probably the earliest. I'm curious how this is going to coincide with the new Surface devices and how they might push that. I hope they have some cool promotion, but we'll see. But stay in, just watch the links I'm going to give you and just stay on top of this so you know what's coming. And if something looks like it's going wrong, speak up and let them know. So what about Windows? You know, one thing that they really weren't talking all that much about with their the Maui stuff is, what about Windows? What about UWP? They didn't give a ton of detail about that. Because Win UI 3 is coming out. So you'll finally have Windows Forms again in .NET Core, WinForms, and UWP, and that's going to all move into this Win UI 3 I've been talking about. My guess is this is all going to consolidate into System.UI, because UWP is already XAML, basically, and WinForms, I don't know that it's going to go the way of the Dodo, just because you've got a designer. But who knows? I don't know where this is going to go. So WinForms future, that may be, the clock may be ticking on that. But I don't know yet. We'll see. I like erasing on my surface. So is this perfection? Like, have we finally solved it all? Like, is everything consolidated and nothing will ever have to get better? Well, we don't really know yet. I mean, Maui itself, it really doesn't exist outside of Microsoft yet, other than looking at the code. The bits are going to be coming this year, but it seems that we'll start being able to feel around, get used to this. And promises like ultimate consolidation have been made before. But with Microsoft, especially recently, especially with .NET Core and .NET Standard, especially with Xamarin, has gotten sweeter each time. It has gotten better. Like, they've delivered on making a fairly consistent developer experience and consolidated developer experience. Like, I don't worry about which string I'm going to use, or which libraries I'm going to use for, like, I can use Link everywhere. I don't have to worry about which version of Link am I using. So I believe Microsoft can do it. They've definitely proven it with Xamarin.Forms and Xamarin in general, and especially with just .NET Core. Right? Just what they've been able to pull off to kind of take the fragmentation and make it a single workable framework or solution for multiple platforms, and even the cloud has been nothing short of awe-inspiring to me. That's a lot of smart people. And to be fair, while we're waiting for Maui, which does seem really cool, it seems to address a lot of the pain points that we have as multi-platform developers, multi-platform Microsoft devs. For the most part, if we need to build a solution right now, we're pretty good with Xamarin.Forms. We still have to, if we need to do like the API and the web, we still have to do the web stuff. We couldn't do everything in Blazor, even though that's very new. But man, we're pretty set if we need to do cloud and mobile right now. But what Microsoft's doing is the next generation, making that simple and easy and natural. And like I said, all the way in the beginning, this is an evolution. I don't think they'll ever be done. There's going to be something else, but it looks like we're consistently getting to something better. We've had a whole bunch of stuff moving to one thing, and now we're at .NET. When before we just had all those other things, and it really has gotten a lot better. So kudos to them, and I'm excited about where this is going. So if you'd like to learn more on Maui, just there it is. GitHub.com, .NET Maui. Boom. This is that video I was telling you about, Journey to One.NET. That's on channel 9. So if you just search for Journey to One.NET, channel 9, you'll get it. It can take a few seconds for that video to come up, so FYI. And remember, it starts at 1:15:30 is roughly where, so an hour and 15 minutes and 30 seconds into that video is about where Maui is discussed. And then that 1:22:34 is when they were talking about the other stuff. I don't remember exactly what that one was, but that might be the MVU or the mobile Blazor bindings. I'm not sure, but just start watching at 1:15. You'll be set. The .NET 6 samples, so if you want to see how they're progressing on .NET 6, it's right there. And if you kind of want to hear what their reasoning was behind .NET Maui and where they see that going, check out that blog post on the Microsoft Dev blogs. If you want to learn about reactive UI, and then mobile Blazor, way cool. Check that out. Very cool stuff. Great. Well, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? And I hope you learned a lot about Maui tonight. There we go. Are there any questions? Let's see. Oh, there's the F# Maui issue. No, so one of the questions was, will Maui apps will end up slow like Java apps? No. They said that their goal is to actually make them faster in Xamarin apps as they stand right now. So you're only going to get faster than Xamarin, and Xamarin's already really quick. Any other questions? Bueller. All right. I'm going to stop recording.